This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is January 7th, 2024, and I am interviewing Mr. Jack Sims. This interview is taking place at the University of Texas at Arlington. It is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography and is part of the Texas Veterans Project. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today, sir.
You're welcome.
Where are you from originally, and tell me a little bit about your growing up.
I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee. When I was 6 months old, my mother and father moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I grew up my entire life in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Obviously, at 6 months old, I don't know anything about Tennessee. I don't know anything about Chattanooga, other than a trip or two back to visit grandparents over the years.
Yeah.
So Albuquerque is home. There's no question. It was home all the way through elementary school, all the way through the University of New Mexico.
Wow.
In Albuquerque.
So where did you go to high school?
I went to high school, to Sandia High School. Now, originally, my father was a civilian, but he worked for the government. And Sandia Base was an Army base, but they had a civilian housing section, just like they had an officer section and an NCO section. We lived all the way up until when I was 13 years old on Sandia Base in the civilian portion of the base. So I went to elementary school on the military base. And when I was 13, my mother and father bought a house in Albuquerque when they eliminated the civilian housing program. And I was 13, so I went to junior high school then in Albuquerque, and then after that went to Sandia High School.
And what activities did you participate in high school?
In high school, well, I was a little bitty runt. I was as a junior, 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed less than 90 pounds.
Wow.
So I was a little bitty. So all the other boys had a good time with the smallest guy and the youngest guy in the class, as you can appreciate. And I wasn't smart enough just to get pushed around and let it go. I'd always haul off and clobber one of them. And then I would just get the stuffings beat out of me. So I spent a whole lot of time in the principal's office in elementary school. Later, as they got bigger in junior high school and then high school, I got smart enough then to say, okay, I'm not going to hit anybody because they might really hurt me now, you know. So, at any rate, I played in the high school band. I played a clarinet and a saxophone. I was in the chess club. And that's pretty much it. I wasn't big enough to play sports. I tried to wrestle, but I didn't weigh enough to make the lightweight wrestling.
Wow.
So I guess from that perspective, I wasn't a jock.
Okay. So you went to University of New Mexico after high school?
I did. I met my wife at Sandia High School. We dated 2 years there, junior and senior. And then we both went to UNM. Again, my father did not have a high school education. Again, in that era, I think most people did, but a lot did not. And for whatever reason, he never graduated high school. But he had a good job with the government. To this day, I don't know all of it or what it involved, because it had to do at that point in time with the atomic bomb and all of that sort of thing. So I have no idea what he did.
That's interesting.
It is. And part of it in those days was at Los Alamos, New Mexico, where there's a lot of research labs and that sort of thing going on. He worked in Albuquerque at Sandia Base, but they did a lot of work back and forth together. So at any rate, without a high school education, I have an older sister, 12 years older than I am. And when she got out of high school, there was no question college.
I see.
That was it. It was non-negotiable. So she went off to college when I started first grade, 12 years. I have an older brother who's 10 years older than I am.
Wow.
Okay, now he had skipped a grade along the way, so he and my sister were right there together. So again, when I was a first grader, he went off to school. And he went to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. My older sister went to school in Denton, Texas.
So, UNT, or North Texas State at that time?
It was, at that time, it was an all-girls school.
Texas Women's.
UTW, Texas Women's University. TWU, Texas Women's University. Correct. Nope, that's where she went to school. And then my brother went to UNM locally. And I didn't know till many, many years later that my father sold his vacation time to pay my sister's tuition.
Wow.
To let her go to college. And then when it was time for my brother, he couldn't afford both. And I never knew for a long time that there was a serious family discussion between he and my mother. And in those days, he felt it was more important for the male to have the formal education than the female. And he was going to have to tell my sister that my brother was going to get to go to college and that she was not going to be able to do that. Well, interestingly enough, my brother got a full-ride scholarship to UNM.
Oh.
So he went on an academic scholarship, paid everything for him, and my father continued to pay for my sister.
Wow,
so
that's great.
They both graduated.
Right, wonderful.
So yeah, and when it came my turn, there was no doubt in my mind. I mean, it was just a given. And I didn't, at that time, appreciate it. Didn't really totally understand it as a high school kid.
Right.
Okay, but it was a given. And I think it's fair to say that way back in that era, if you defied a parent's directive, for lack of a better term, it wasn't called child abuse.
Right.
It was not called child abuse. So it was an absolute given that I was going to college.
So what was your major?
Architecture.
How did you choose that?
Yeah, I was given, you know, I had to go to UNM. My mom and dad couldn't afford anything else. And it was there in Albuquerque. My girlfriend's parents at the time were pretty much in the same boat, so it was a given. She was going to UNM, so we both went to college together, which worked out quite well. So architecture, wow. Trying to make a long story short, I didn't have a clue when I went to school as a freshman what I was going to be. Absolutely not a clue. I took just all the basic classes, you know, math and English and all those basic classes they list for you. I was just a middle-of-the-road student. I truly didn't have a direction or knew what I wanted to do. But I got in the ROTC program as a freshman. And I really don't know exactly why, other than my older brother was in the ROTC program. And at that time, he had obviously graduated, he was commissioned, and he was still in the Air Force. Okay, so, and I really don't know, and I've thought about it a lot over the years, if that was an influence. It wasn't a direct influence, but maybe it was an indirect influence. At any rate, I got in the ROTC program, and I really liked that program. That military discipline of there's black and white and no gray, nothing's in between, and it's a yes sir and a no sir. Now, we all know in real life that's not true. Okay, that's absolutely not true. There's all kinds of shades of gray, okay? But that met my personality perfect, absolutely perfect, because I was a yes or no person. Okay, if that's the rule, you play by the rule. There's no excuse whatsoever for breaking the rule. So that fit my personality perfect. And I needed discipline. There's no question. I, even at that age, let my mouth overload my butt a few too many times. Okay, so the military took care of that. So ROTC I enjoyed, and I did very well in all the ROTC classes. I had no difficulty with those, stayed right at the top of the class, and thoroughly enjoyed it. But,
Was there anyone on the faculty there who influenced you?
No, there wasn't. When I went to UNM, I truly knew absolutely nobody. I didn't know anything about it. And I had to live at home. I didn't get to live in a dorm because my mom and dad couldn't afford it. And the same was true with my wife. Okay, so when you live at home and go to school, you're a commuter, so to speak. You don't get involved in all the campus activities and, you know, like living in a dorm or a fraternity, a sorority, all that stuff. So in fairness, there's a lot of college that you miss. Now, I didn't know it at that time. But looking back now with children and grandchildren, I can see that, boy, I missed a ton by not being on campus. But that's the way it was. That was the reality of the situation.
What year was this we're talking about?
I graduated high school in 1964.
Okay.
And went to the university. You know, you graduate in June and started in September.
Wow.
In those days, there's 3 months in the summertime for everybody, and school starts in September, you know, and it ends the next May.
Right.
So I started that September, and again, I had no idea what I was going to do, so I just had all basic classes, and I did that my whole freshman year. And I just thought, man, I don't know what I want to do, you know. What do you want to be, an engineer, an architect, an accountant, a doctor? I don't know anything about any of that stuff. So along the way, I had taken drafting in high school, and I was actually pretty good at that. The geometry portion, the shapes, figures, all that sort of thing, I could understand that. That came reasonably without a lot of difficulty. Math and physics and calculus and all that stuff, oh, Lordy, I was dumb. Okay, so I took some of those classes and decided real quick I'm not going to be an engineer.
Right.
Okay, that's not going to happen. If I have to take any more of those kind of classes, okay, I'll never get there. So I liked drafting, and I thought, well, I'll go try some of those classes. So they were, in those days, that sort of thing was taught by the architectural school, which in those days was part of the fine arts. Architecture was not an independent college in those days. It was a sub, if you will, to the School of Fine Arts. So I started taking those classes, and I liked those classes. So I decided, okay, I'll study architecture. So that's how I ended up in architecture school.
Did your mom work outside the home?
No, she was a homemaker.
Okay, so just your dad was working and your mom was home.
Correct.
And then just the two siblings?
Yes, that's it.
What's the story of that huge gap between your brother and you?
That's been a family joke for ever and ever. Okay? My mother swears that after all those years, my father wanted another child for whatever reason. Okay? And everyone else in the family says it was a mistake. Okay? So it's been a joke. It's been a joke that 10 years later, you were a mistake.
Right, right.
So I have no idea why.
We refer to it as an unexpected blessing.
There you go. That would work.
So what year did you graduate from college?
1968.
Well, Vietnam was hot and heavy then. You were still in the ROTC when you graduated?
Yeah, as I said, I started ROTC in 1964 as a freshman. It was a 4-year program.
Okay.
And at that time, to be an officer in the Air Force, you had to have a college degree. There were no exceptions. So truthfully, my motivation, okay, to graduate college was I wanted to be an officer in the Air Force. That was more motivating to me at that time than getting a degree.
And you mentioned that you didn't think that your brother necessarily had an influence on that decision. Why then?
You know what? I don't know, Joe. I've thought of that a lot. I just had this real desire, okay, as corny as it may sound, to be a general officer. I was just convinced I was going to go into the military. I was going to be an officer, and by golly, I was going to be a general someday. And I don't know why. That was a motivation. But I look back now after all these years, and it was ROTC that was my motivator. Because you had to have that degree, and they were not going to commission me without that degree.
Right.
Okay, so that pushed me to make sure I passed those classes, even the ones that were really, really hard. You have to pass them. You have to make this happen. And I did. So like all the other ROTC cadets, between my junior and senior years when you go to basic training, okay, you finish 2 years of your ROTC commitment, and you go to basic training. You know, the whole bit like all the other military, they shave your head and put you in a t-shirt and wind shorts and line you up against the wall so you have no personality and everybody looks the same. And then they start the abuse program to see who can cut it and who can't. I spent 30 days, Holloman Air Force Base, Alamogordo, New Mexico. I don't know if you've ever been to South New Mexico.
I have.
There's little or nothing there. Okay, little or nothing. But it really didn't matter because we had 30 days and we never left the base anyway. You know, so it was again, it was hard. It was physically really hard. But I completed that program, and I went back. And at the time, I needed 40 semester hours to graduate with a degree in architecture.
Okay.
Well, back in those days, a lot of the engineers and architects, some of those, I won't say more difficult, but probably those programs, they would allow the cadets to have one extra semester. So you could have 4 years plus 1 semester to get your degree.
I see.
So when you were done with your 4 years of ROTC, you were called a completed cadet. So you had no ROTC classes or training for that last semester. You just went and took the hours you needed to graduate and then got commissioned. Okay. I had planned on that 1 more semester. I needed it with 40 semester hours, and they're all senior hours. I had planned on going back after basic training and going to school and finishing in 3 semesters. Okay. But when I came back from basic training and the colonel in charge of ROTC called me in, he congratulated me, number one, on finishing very, very well and high, if you would. And then he said he had some bad news. And he said that because of Vietnam, he said, and this is coming from way above my pay grade, he said the Air Force has discontinued the completed cadet program. He said because too many cadets were intentionally not graduating, and they were delaying in hopes that they would not go immediately to Vietnam. So he said that completed cadet program no longer exists. And he said, and you've already signed your commitment papers, et cetera, et cetera. So he said, you have to graduate in 2 semesters and then get your commission. And he said, if you don't, he said, you'll have to still serve your time, your 4-year commitment, but it'll be as an enlisted man. And of course, that was like earth-shaking.
Sure.
To say the least, because again, I was a middle-of-the-road student. Listen, I was not some academic scholar that could walk in the door and take all those kind of classes and whiz my way through them.
Right.
That was not the case. So I went to the dean of the architecture school and explained it to him, and he said, absolutely not. He said, I'll not allow that. He said, that's just impossible. He said, 20 hours
Right.
of the last year, and I thought, well, now what do you do?
Right.
Okay, I mean, I'm kind of between a rock and a hard spot. So
Right.
the colonel from ROTC went and talked to the dean of the architecture school and convinced him that, hey, look, what do you have to lose? Let him try. If he fails the class, at least he's had an opportunity. At least he's had a run at it. If you don't let him take the class, then he's done. Okay, so the dean agreed, and I signed up for 20 hours first semester. Now, in the olden days, unlike today with computers and all the rest, grades were posted on the bulletin board.
Wow.
Okay, so after a semester was over, you'd go to the architecture building, and on the bulletin board were posted the grades of the different classes. Okay, so after that first semester I went, and I'm looking on the bulletin board, class at a time, and got through all of them, and wow, I passed every class. I said, holy cats, I really, really did this. So I still have 1 more semester to go. So I signed up for 20 again. The same deal. Okay. Now, in fairness, I would have to tell you that my girlfriend, my high school girlfriend, that was my college girlfriend, that senior year was my fiance, she and my older sister, who was a school teacher in Albuquerque, probably got their associate degree in architecture that year. Okay, because they helped me build balsa wood models. They helped me do all kinds of stuff for all these laboratories and all this other kind of stuff. So it came the end of that semester, and again the same routine. I go look at the grades, and they're all posted, and I passed every class.
That's amazing.
I thought, oh, thank you, Lord.
Yes.
Thank you, Lord. Okay. Well, I'm convinced to this day that the professor cut me some slack. Okay, he would never admit it if you ask him, I'm sure, but I just have to believe he did, because I want to tell you what, I struggled in some of those. I really had a tough time, okay, and I don't know that he really did, but he might have given me a break along the line here or there, cut me a little bit of slack. But at any rate, I passed. That gave me all the credit hours I needed for the bachelor's degree in architecture. So I graduated in June of 1968, and my wife graduated at the same time, and a week later we got married.
Wow.
Okay.
Yes.
And 1 week later I got commissioned a lieutenant in the Air Force, and I have to tell you, I think the commissioning ceremony was more exciting to me than graduation.
Is that so?
No, it was. It was just like, wow, mission accomplished. I got it. I did it. I'm an officer now.
That's huge.
It was great. Well, it was for me.
And there was a lot to overcome.
It was great. It was, I mean, I was really tickled.
Did your dad serve in the military?
No.
So he
did not. No.
I guess it's Sandia National Laboratory. Is that?
Yes, that's
okay.
correct.
Right.
Sandia National
So
Laboratory.
yeah, that's really interesting that he didn't serve in the military.
No, he didn't, and it was a great day. I mean, I do remember that very clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, all the cadets are standing tall in their uniforms, and all your cadet ranks and everything are gone. You're just in your dress blue uniform.
Right.
Okay, and you go up one at a time, and you get to select who the commissioning officer is from any branch of the service, if you choose to do that. Well, my brother at the time was a major in the Air Force, and he was a teacher at the Air Force Academy. So he came to Albuquerque, and he did the commissioning.
That's pretty special. That's amazing.
So I had my mother pin my gold bar on one side, and my bride of 1 week pinned the gold bar on the other side. And my brother did the commissioning. So that was an exciting day.
I bet it was.
That was real exciting. So
and
I was a second lieutenant.
How'd your father feel about that?
Oh, he was excited. I mean, all three of his children would graduate college when he never finished high school. And of course, he knew by then how important it was. Oh, he was tickled.
Amazing.
Yeah, he was absolutely tickled. And my father-in-law of 1 week, and of course he had known me ever since high school. Okay, I mean, we dated 2 years of high school, 4 years of college, so 6 years. He knew me well. He was a World War II Navy vet.
I see.
He was really proud.
Oh.
I mean, it was like, wow.
That's great.
It might have been the first time that he probably would never admit it, but maybe his daughter did okay. You know? maybe I would be okay after all. You know, maybe this guy's going to turn out.
So after commissioning and after after marriage and commissioning and graduation, all within very short. Oh my goodness, what came next?
Well, I'd originally been told that I wouldn't be called to active duty for several months. So like all other young newlyweds, after my commissioning, we had planned on a honeymoon and a little downtime after college, et cetera, et cetera. Well, right before my commissioning, I got orders to report for active duty 2 weeks after commissioning. So we graduated, got married, got commissioned, and a week later left for active duty. Okay. And I went to Warner Robins Air Force Base, Georgia, for my first duty assignment.
So, what'd you think of that?
I hated it. It was the worst place in the world.
That's not the first time I've heard that.
Albuquerque, New Mexico, and again, growing up my entire life, I didn't know any different. I just assumed the whole world was like that. Okay, where the humidity's low.
Right.
Other than rattlesnakes, everything else is pretty reasonable. And temperatures in the daytime, even when it's hot with no humidity, are tolerable. And then in the evening, it cools down, and it's wonderful every evening. So it's cool in the morning, cool in the evening, even if it's hot in the daytime. Naive me, we go to Georgia. Holy cats, the humidity was 90%, and the temperature is 90 degrees. I mean, I couldn't hardly breathe. I thought, this is unbearable. Okay? I mean, holy cats, you'd leave your apartment in a nice starched khaki uniform just to walk to the car, drive to the airbase, and walk to the office door, and you look like you come out of a gymnasium. You know, I said, this is unbearable. How do people live like this? So weather-wise, I hated the place. Okay, the fresh peaches in Georgia and fresh peach pie and all that southern cooking was awful good. That was exceptional, as a matter of fact. But the job was horrible.
So what was your job? When did you find out what your job was going to be, or your assignment was going to be? And then, what was your job?
In those days, and I don't think it even exists anymore, it was Continental Air Command, which is a major air command headquarters. I'm sure they're long gone. Okay, and the specialty code in the Air Force in those days, no matter what kind of engineer you were, mechanical, electrical, civil, whatever, architect, anything like that, was all called the Civil Engineering Specialty Code. So civil engineering. So I went to the civil engineering portion of the headquarters. Okay, long story short, an administrative job, pushing paper. It was horrible. You want to design a bank? Go to page 49 of a book about this thick, and here's everything you need to know about designing a bank. Here's the floor plan, here's the wall sections, here's the details, here's everything. Read it all, fill out these forms. Okay, so you put these programs together for the whole air command. All this stuff comes together. It was all, to me, very disappointing.
Right.
I was like, oh, wow, man. I mean, I was really excited about all of this. So I figured out real quick that, gosh, I hope there's something more to this military career that I had aspirations for, that I was just so excited for. So I'd ask the other officers that were there, young captains, well, how long have you been here? And one would say, well, 3 years. And I'd ask another one, he'd say 4 years. And I say, well, how long? You know, do you have to stay here? And they say, well, you know, a normal tour is 4 years. I thought, 4 years? I've been here 4 months. Oh, Lord, you got to be kidding me. So I had a sponsor. Every junior officer has a sponsor when you come in. Mine was a captain, and he had been, prior to his coming to Warner Robins, he had been in an outfit called Red Horse. Red Horse is the Air Force equivalent of the Navy Seabees. It's a construction squadron, and they design and build things in the field. Okay, and he had told me about that. And I said, well, that's what I really wanted. That's what I thought I was coming here to get.
Right.
You know? Well, they obviously were not at Warner Robins. So I went over to base personnel, second lieutenant, green as a gourd. I go in, and you know, every branch of the military has senior chiefs and chief master sergeants and all the rest of that stuff. In those days, the highest you could get in the Air Force was a chief master sergeant, you know, 6 stripes and 2 rockers up above. And this guy was in base personnel, had been there, you know, for 30 years or whatever, and probably knew more about the Air Force and personnel than anybody on the whole air base. And I go in and introduced myself and told him what I was interested to do, and he sat me down. He was really a funny guy, but very polite because I was an officer. Explained that there was no way in hell that I was going to get transferred from that air base. And of course, I guess, I don't know whether I'd call it stubbornness, determination, or not smart enough to really understand the facts.
Right.
But I said, no, wait, nothing's got to be impossible. So he explained to me that to be in Red Horse, number one, you had to have a minimum timing grade of 18 months, which means you were ready to be promoted to first lieutenant. Okay. And I had 4 months. And he said, you have to be fully qualified in your specialty code. That also means a minimum of 18 months. He said, you haven't been in it long enough to even know what it is. Okay? And he said, and a typical assignment here has a certain number of years, and you obviously are not anywhere close to that. So he said, Lieutenant, I'm wasting my time filling out these papers. Well, I was pretty persistent. So at the end, the chief says to me, he said, Lieutenant, he said, I admire your determination. He said, I question it a little bit, but I admire it. Okay, and he said, I tell you what, we're going to have a gentleman's agreement. I'm going to fill out these forms. I'm going to submit them. And I'm telling you, after 30 years in personnel, they're going to come back disapproved. But I'm going to turn them in. And when I turn them in and they come back, and I'm going to show them to you, then we're going to have a gentleman's agreement that you're not coming back to base personnel asking for any other transfers. You're going to go back and you're going to do the job that you were sent here to do and serve your time before you move on. I said, you have a deal, Chief. So off I went. About a month later, he calls me, says, Lieutenant, come over to the personnel office. So I go over to base personnel, and I walked in and I sat down, and he looked at me and he said, who do you know? And I said, excuse me? He said, look at this. He handed it to me. They waived my timing grade. They waived my rank, and I was accepted to Red Horse with a condition that I would pass the 30-day training program. Okay? And I said, Chief, I don't know anybody. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Honest to God, I do not know anybody. So he laughed and shook my hand and said, hey, 2 weeks, you're out of here.
Wow.
So I thought. And then
Now, had your wife moved with you?
Oh, yeah, she
to
was
Warner
in
Robins?
Georgia. Yeah,
How did she feel about?
Well, that's the next part of the story.
All right, good.
Okay, so the chief explains to me after I'm real excited about this. Again, he kind of talked to me like a father, even though I was a second lieutenant. Okay, and he said, now, Lieutenant, you do recognize where all 3 Red Horse squadrons are at right now. And I looked at him with this dumb look on my face, and he said, Lieutenant, he said, 2 of them are in Vietnam and 1 of them's in Thailand. And I said, oh. And he said, well, he said, look at it this way, Lieutenant. He said, the good news is you're going to get a $50 per month pay raise for hazard duty pay. I said, $50. Yeah. Well, I made $400 a month. So that's 10% plus pay raise.
Right.
So I'm excited about that. So I go home that night and I go in. I tell my bride of 9 months that I got some really good news. I got a pay raise today, and I told her it was $50. And of course, she's excited as I am about $50. And it took about, a minute, maybe a minute and a half. And she stopped and looked at me and said, what did you do?
Oh my goodness.
I said, well, here's the deal. So I told her, I said, hey, look, we're leaving in 2 weeks. I'm going initially to the 556 Red Horse Squadron in Thailand. So we left there in 2 weeks. I took her back home to Albuquerque. She lived with her mom and dad there for a year and taught junior high school. And I left Albuquerque. I went to Eglin Air Force Base, Florida for 30 days of Red Horse training that made boot camp look like a baby camp.
Really?
It was tough.
Really?
It was tough physically. It was tough mentally. I mean, they pushed hard. Okay? But again, I was determined, even knowing that I was going to be gone a while, that I mean, really, this was headed right toward that dream I had.
Right, right. What was her reaction when she found out what you had done?
Well, she's a wonderful woman, okay? And we've been married 56 years now. So on one hand, I think she was as disappointed as I was that I was going to be gone for a year or more. Okay, that's pretty hard when you're only married 9 months. But on the other hand, I think she knew that inside I was really excited about an opportunity like Red Horse. I mean, in the whole engineering spectrum of the Air Force, Red Horse, they're the prima donnas.
I see. Okay.
They're the guys. If you're in the engineering field, Red Horse is a big ticket on your resume.
I see.
Okay, so I think she was excited about that. So I spent 30 days in Eglin, Florida, and I finished that training. She came down for a long weekend, and after that long weekend, they trained a half a squadron at a time. So they rotated a half of a Red Horse squadron at a time. So my half of the squadron that had just finished that 30 days training, they loaded all of us up, and off we went. We went to Thailand initially.
How many people were in that class?
Oh, I'm going to say 50. I was the only officer.
Really?
Okay. I was the only officer. All the rest were enlisted men. I'm sure that's because of all those waivers. I didn't know it in those days. Okay, but you know what? That was not an issue, man. It just makes you want to work harder.
So, off to Thailand you go, leaving your new bride behind.
I did.
What was your parents' reaction to?
My father, as best I was told in later years, I didn't notice anything right then, to be honest. And I'm sure whatever emotions they had, they all, controlled it. I think knowing what I knew years later, it'd be fair to say that my father, emotion-wise, was totally under control. He felt pretty confident. My mother was a nervous wreck. She was just absolutely like they're taking into the, far into the world.
Yeah.
I think my father-in-law, the Navy veteran, was proud. I think he was concerned that, I was going to be gone a long time, but he had been in the Navy. He had been on a ship forever and ever during World War II, and he was still in the Navy when he and my mother-in-law got married, and he was gone after that. So, I mean, he could relate to that. So I think all was good with that at that point in time. And I got to Thailand. I spent a short period of time in Thailand, a couple months, and then I got called in and told by the colonel that I was being transferred then to the 554 Red Horse, which was in Phang Rang.
So time to
tough.
go in country.
Yes.
And so what was that news like for you? How did you receive that?
Well, actually, I was okay with it then. I mean, it was Red Horse, and I just knew that it's, these guys are the best of the best, and that was really important to me. I think I'd be fair to say that I was young enough and not smart enough to be afraid. Okay.
I see, yeah.
So I went. Of course, our communications home in those days were only letters, not like today's electronic communications where, you can communicate with anybody anywhere in the world. They were letters, so I wrote the letter home, and I'm sure Jacqueline was concerned, and I learned later years my mother was just horrified.
Oh, my goodness.
So, at any rate, I went from Thailand through Cam Ranh Bay, the biggest air base in Vietnam, where everybody in and out of country comes and goes. And then I went from there to Phan Rang, which is up north of Cam Ranh Bay, up on the ocean side, the North China Sea. And that's where I ended up.
Did you feel, after all that training that you'd been through and everything, did you feel adequately prepared for your duties in Vietnam?
Yes, I did. Again, I don't know if I was just young enough and not smart enough. I wasn't afraid. I was confident. I was confident that I knew what I needed to do and how I needed to do it. And I had senior officers that gave me guidance and told me what I needed to know. And they were the leaders. I followed. Okay, I didn't have any problems with it. It was a terrible place to be. There's no question about that. I'm not sure anybody that was there could say Vietnam was a pleasant place to be. But the duties, the assignments, wow, they were so much better than filling out forms in Warner Robins, Georgia, that there was no comparison.
Humidity was comparison, though.
Oh, Lord.
Comparison, I guess.
Well, a short story about that. When we got to Georgia, and I told you how bad the humidity and temperature was, I told just about everybody we knew that Georgia was the absolute worst place in the world. I'd never been anywhere where the temperature and humidity was that bad. It was just absolutely horrible. Well, the very first letter I wrote home, the very first night I got to Phan Rang, okay, I wrote a letter to Jacqueline and I said, I lied to you. I said, Warner Robins, Georgia is the second worst place in the world for humidity and temperature. I said, right now, I'm in the place that's number one.
Oh, my
Number
goodness.
one. And I said it's that way 24 hours a day.
So what did your day-to-day look like?
Well, again, second lieutenant, junior officer. I mean, everybody knows in the military, forgive my language, shit flows downhill.
That's right.
Okay, so they earned their stripes. I got to earn mine. So some of the duties, some of my initial duties were riding convoy. Okay?
Really?
And that was when we would go from Phan Rang to other places that projects were being built. And there was a lead jeep. That's where the second lieutenant rode. And then there's the big Air Force trucks loaded with materials. And then the last Air Force truck has barricades on the back of it, and then two M60 machine guns on each side. And that's your protection. Everybody else obviously had a sidearm, a 38 and an M16, and that was your individual protection. And we would ride from the main base where the supplies and everything were, and we would go and deliver those to a location and then turn around the next day and come back. And, the basic marching orders were get there before dark.
Right.
You're safe on this end and safe on that end, but when it's dark between here and there, who knows?
Right.
So I did that for a long time, back and forth, all different
How long
places.
do you think?
Oh, wow. Let me think. Several months, probably. All kinds of different locations. I couldn't even point them out on the map to you. I mean, I don't know. It's not like they all had names. There were places we were building things, doing things. And they were all over. But in fairness, they all looked the same.
Right.
I mean, there wasn't like one was on the ocean and one was on a cliff, or one was on the beach. They weren't that way. They all looked pretty much the same, so I don't know. I did that for a while. One assignment I do remember, I took a small crew, about 6 or 7 of us, and we went one night on a chopper, and they took us in that evening and let us out, and a Army enlisted man called me on the radio and had a call sign, et cetera, and we went to a Special Forces camp, and we stayed there for 10 days, and we built barricades and put down what we called AM2 matting. It's steel plank matting, PSP, perforated steel planking. Okay, and they're about 8 feet long and about 2 feet wide, and they have circle holes in them, and you lock them in place and take pins and pound them together, and we'd build temporary landing strips or temporary launching pads out of those. So we leveled an area and we put a bunch of those down, and then we put barricades in between them, barricades that looked similar to highway guardrails or heavy corrugated metal, if you would, 2 sides, and then fill them full of dirt. And that's so that a chopper could sit on the ground with another chopper beside him, and if they did get hit on the ground, then you didn't have a chain reaction and lose a half a dozen helicopters.
I see.
So they would land the choppers, and then they would roll them over in between these barricades, and they would refuel them and re-ammo them and get them ready for the next mission. Okay, so we built a string of those at that particular time, and there was a start date and a finish date, and I do remember the number. It was 10 days, and it was real clear that, hey, this is real important. You're going to start on this day, and you're going to finish on 10 days, and then we're going to come pick you up and take you home. Make sure you're done.
Right.
Okay? That's fair.
Right.
That's the way it was. And I
What
do remember. I do remember one bit of humor. There was an Army lieutenant colonel that was obviously in charge there. And when we came in that first morning, he came and introduced himself and told me what they needed, et cetera, and I understood all that. And I can't quote it exact, it's been a long time, but I still remember the gist of it. Okay, and he got done and he asked me if I had any questions, and I said, no, sir, I was clear. And he said, well, let me be clear with you. He said, your job here is to put all that matting down and put all those barricades up. He said, my job here is to keep your ass alive. And he said, I'll do my job, I guarantee it. Are you going to guarantee me you're going to do yours?
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Right.
You bet.
Right.
And we did. Got all done. We're waiting on our helicopter ride out of there. End of the 10th day, and this same colonel comes back and walks up and shakes my hand, and he said, Lieutenant, for an Air Force dude, you're all right. Okay? And we got on the helicopter and went home.
Wow.
So,
Had you ridden on a helicopter before that time?
oh, no.
What was that like for you?
Well, better than a plane with no windows that rocks and rolls where I got airsick all the time.
No.
Okay, at least these I could see out of these.
Right.
Well, though they didn't bother me, they were a mode of transportation, and when you went in someplace or when they took you out of someplace, they were a wonderful thing to see coming.
Yeah, imagine.
There was no question. And that's how they took us into places like that camp. Everywhere else we took vehicles on ground, but in those cases they took us and they took materials and stuff into those locations.
Right. What you mentioned writing letters as part of your communication. Were you ever able to make a Mars call home, or did you send tapes back and forth, anything like that?
Now, I wrote a letter every day I was at Fan Rang, in my hooch that night. I wrote a letter, and I received a letter every day. Wow. So even with the delay time in the mail, it doesn't matter. You're getting one, and they're in date order.
Yeah.
And only the days that I was out in the field are gone, and I couldn't do it. Okay, that was our only mode of communication. Was letters. Now, after we were there 6 months, we were allowed one phone call home, a 5-minute phone call. But 5 minutes was not like on a phone today. It was through radio. Right. So on your date and time, you would have to let whoever you're going to speak with on the other end know with the time change. So they would be ready to accept the call, and we go get in line, okay? And the radio operator would dial the number, and you would speak and say over, then they would speak and say over, and you would speak, and that was the way it was communicated on the radio. And after 5 minutes, your time was up, and then the next guy made his phone call. So yes, I was like everyone else. I had that phone call. I was excited about it, and I had been there more than 6 months at the time when I took it.
And what was that like?
Well, it was exciting.
To hear your wife's voice.
Oh, it was exciting. There's no question about it. It's little things like that that we all take for granted now.
Sure.
I certainly do after all these years. But those things were important back then. It was important to write that letter. It was important to have that phone call. It was really exciting to go on R&R. You got rest and relaxation for 5 days.
Tell me about that. Where did you go?
We went to Kauai, Hawaii, after I'd been there 9 months. Okay, and again, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, I'd never been anywhere. And they took most of us on R&R did go to Hawaii. Not everybody, but the bulk of us did. And it's 5 days. So they flew us in, and my wife met me, and we spent 5 days there like all the other soldiers. And it was pretty exciting, no doubt. And then I knew when that 5 days was up, she went back to Albuquerque to teach school, and I was on the downhill slide, man. I only had 3 months left.
Right.
That's all I had left was 3 months. So that was a positive.
So what was that last 3 months like for you then?
It was the same as the rest of it, except for you get more and more excited as you get closer to the end. We had what we called short calendars, and you could have basically whatever you wanted, but it might be something, an elephant, a giraffe, a puzzle. It could be, whatever you wanted, and it had 365 pieces. I see. Okay. And every day you'd color one piece. So if I'd be gone out in the field, I'd come back, and I'd get to mark 2 or 3. That's exciting. Yes. Okay? That's exciting. Yes. And you mark them. Well, when you get down toward the end, there's very little left. The rest of the puzzle's all done. Yeah. It's pretty exciting. Yes. And on the day you leave, you mark the last one.
Was that an Air Force thing? I've never heard that before.
You know what? I don't know. I don't know. I know all the officers in Red Horse did it.
Wow.
I have no idea where it came from. I don't know if it was a tradition, but I know they all had one, and I had one, and I marked it.
So what was maybe the most intense moment of your tour in Vietnam? Do you have one?
I don't know that I would call it a moment, but I think without any hesitation, I would say the best assignment, if you would. The most challenging, was a place called Han Tre Island. It's off the coast up toward Da Nang, the Trang, up that area. It was an island that was strategically located, and our mission was to build a radar facility on the top of that island, and to do it within a very short time frame. And obviously because of the strategic location, they needed that radar facility sooner, not later. So I was the lieutenant in charge, and I took a crew of a dozen or so. I don't remember the exact number. And the Army LCU boats took us and all of our equipment out there and landed on the beach. And they brought our food and water back and forth to us for the whole time we were there. We were there just a little over 4 months. And we had helicopters that came in and brought materials and helped us. And I have a couple photographs later, if you're interested, of helicopter hovering and helping us build guard towers. We built guard towers around the top of the island to secure it. And then we built a radar facility building and then a dirt road from it down to the beach. And that was our job. And when we got all completed, we loaded up on the Army LCU boats, and the radar folks came in to put in all their equipment and do their thing, and off we went. So that certainly was the most memorable assignment, just because of the magnitude. That was a good job. It was hard, but you know what? There wasn't anything that was real easy.
So what did going home look like for you? Leaving Vietnam and going back home, what did that look like for you?
Oh, well, I think like everybody else, when that comes, you're excited. I mean, I certainly was. And I remember landing in the Albuquerque airport in my jungle fatigues and my boots, because that's all I had, like everybody else. Okay, and my duffel bag, everything in my life at that time was in a duffel bag, just like every other soldier. And yeah, I was real excited. My father-in-law, the Navy veteran, and my bride met me at the Albuquerque airport. And yeah, what can I say? You know, it's hugs and kisses, and more than delighted to be here. It was exciting, no question.
And were there any protests or anything going on that you witnessed?
Yeah, there was. And I was totally naive to all of that. Again, without the communications we have today, I truly didn't know anything about Jane Fonda and the war protest and all the rest of that. I mean, all that happened obviously while I was there. But nobody ever wrote me letters about it or told me about it, and I truly didn't know. But when we arrived in Albuquerque, and obviously having been raised there my whole life, I know the entrance and exit doors to the airport. Okay, and we're headed out. My father-in-law starts heading a different direction, and I thought, well, wait a minute, where are we going? Where are we going? And he says, oh, let's go over this way. It's kind of a shortcut. And I thought, maybe he knows something I don't know. Well, what I found out later was there were some protesters outside the front doors to the airport.
I see.
And he went around the other way so that I didn't have to encounter them. And that's the only encounter I had with them. I never met them one-on-one, thank goodness. I think, in fairness, had that occurred, I probably would have ended up being the bad guy. Just because of the emotion of it. But that's the only time that I ever knew that was going on. And we only stayed in Albuquerque a little less than 2 weeks and then shipped off to Germany.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so, and there was none of that in Germany. Okay.
Your mother, when you came home, what was
she was
that
excited.
like?
Oh yeah, she was excited. I'm sure a total ton of relief. A ton of relief. I think, like, I'm not abnormal to everybody else's family. The whole family's excited. You've been gone a long time. You have been in a place that's dangerous, and you come home. So it's kind of a celebration for everybody, no doubt. And I think my father-in-law, in particular, was more excited than I had ever seen him. I mean,
is that right?
He took me right away. He took me down to the VFW hall in Albuquerque to introduce me to all his World War II buddies as his son-in-law, the Vietnam vet. His son-in-law, the Vietnam vet. His son-in-law, the lieutenant. Okay, I mean, he was so proud. He just introduced me to everybody.
That's wonderful.
And I still have to this day, it's like a metal credit card that's the member of the VFW Hall in Albuquerque, New Mexico, 1969.
Wow. There were some problems in some of the VFWs and some of the other veterans organizations with Vietnam veterans. World War II veterans had difficulty seeing Vietnam veterans as maybe their equals in some respects. You didn't experience any of that?
None. Absolutely none. Like I said, my father-in-law was like a kid in a candy store. He was absolutely excited.
That's wonderful.
He was proud.
Right.
He was real proud. And again, I was only there, once or twice. I don't even remember the exact number. We were only there 2 weeks, and then I shipped out.
Right.
We both left to go to Germany and spent 5 years in Germany.
Where'd you go?
There were no protests or any of that sort of thing going on, and anything that was going on back in the States still, it didn't impact me directly. So I really had little or no impact from the protest.
That's good.
Okay.
Where did you go in Germany?
First assignment was Hahn Air Force Base. It's in the Hundrick area down by the Mosel River and the vineyards and all that sort of thing. And wow, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was unbelievable. Beautiful, beautiful country. The German culture, the German, local Germans just welcomed the Americans with open arms. I mean, it was fabulous. We lived off base in a rented apartment, and the owner of the building, the landlord, Herr and Frau Buch, lived upstairs, and it was a classic German structure, beautiful, beautiful place, and 5 minutes from the air base, and the German food you can't beat. It was fabulous.
When did children start coming along?
Not right then. Okay, we were. Wow, I have to think. How long were we there? A couple years. I was in the civil engineering squad in there, base engineering. Again, not a job like I'd come from, but a good job in base engineering. And there was an organization called Prime Beef. Now, Prime Beef, basically, for lack of a better analogy, in total civilian unwar, for lack of a better term, was the equivalent of Red Horse. They were a construction squadron.
Okay.
Well, Prime Beef was on Hahn Air Force Base. And the whole squadron was made up of people from the base civil engineering. Okay? And all of our equipment and supplies were always available. And we did exercise on a regular basis, and we could be mobilized if they needed a Prime Beef team, construction, engineering, support, something, anywhere in the world. We all had inoculations to go anywhere. It was a C-130 airplane that was at the end of the runway that had all our materials and stuff. It was an F-4 fighter base that had nukes, so the fighter jets exercised all the time. And when they would exercise, we would exercise. And I had to live within 5 minutes of the air base because I had to hear the air horn when it went off.
Oh,
the
wow.
alert horn. Because again, we didn't have landline telephones. You didn't just walk in and have a telephone. I mean, you put your name on a list, and sometimes it was a very long time before you got a phone. So when the alert horn would go off, all of us had to be within that distance to get to our stations. And we would go to our stations, and we had our tools and equipment and uniforms and all the rest, and we would all load up on a C-130, and it'd go roaring down the runway, and you'd know it was an exercise when it gets to the end of the runway, and instead of liftoff, the engine shut down, and then you know he's going to go up and take you back home. And it's an exercise. So you exercise, exercise, exercise all the time, okay, until the engines don't shut down and there's liftoff. Then there's dead silence.
You know you're going somewhere.
Dead silence. And you don't know where.
Right.
You have no idea where.
I want to back up and ask a quick question. Did you lose anyone close to you while you were in Vietnam?
I did not, thank goodness.
Yes.
I did not.
Yes. So you mentioned you were in Germany for 5 years. Did you stay at Hahn Air Force Base that entire time, or did you go somewhere else?
I did not. We were at Hahn, oh wow, a little more than a year, and again with all these prime beef exercises. And the one time I'm referring to was instead of the engine shutting down, he lifted off.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know where we were going until it landed. Okay, and fortunately, it was at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like we went to somewhere on the other end of the world. But once we landed and found out where we were, we thought, wow, we're still in Germany. But it's 6 months temporary duty. Okay,
I see. Wow.
To do just what Red Horse did in Vietnam, design and build buildings in the field. At that point in time, and ever since World War II, the United States government, United States Air Forces Europe, USAFE, their headquarters was in Wiesbaden. Mm-hmm. Okay, and over the years, Wiesbaden had grown to be a very large city, and in essence, the air base was in the middle of it. And the German government wanted us to vacate that air base. So the American government agreed to relocate it, and they were going to relocate that entire air base to Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. So it's like moving a city, as you can appreciate. You don't have any of the support facilities in place. So you have to have dormitories, banks, post offices, infrastructure, all kinds of things. So the Air Force activated prime beef. And that's why, okay, and I was a junior captain by then, and I left with the prime beef team. And I went to Ramstein for 6 months temporary duty to start those construction projects. And there was the American squadron, mine, and then there was another co-equal to me, a captain, American captain, but his squadron was German.
I see. Okay.
They had a German officer and captain. Mick was the boss. But they were all Germans and we were all Americans, and they did certain projects and we did certain projects. But we worked side by side, and we both reported and worked for a brigadier general.
I see.
So when two junior captains work direct for a brigadier general, that tells you the importance of relocating that entire air base. Mm-hmm. General Thompson was the officer, the flag officer in command of relocating all of USAFE. Okay,
wow.
So he was in control of all the forces on the ground, and those two construction squadrons were the primary.
Did you know when you got to Wiesbaden, did you know how long you were going to be there? Did they tell you this is a 6-month rotation? And
TDY in those days was 6 months.
Okay.
They couldn't keep you by rules in those days on temporary duty more than 6 months. If they kept you more than 6 months, then it became a permanent change of duty assignment, and that meant family gets to relocate and come with you. Mm-hmm. Temporary duty, it can be like a remote tour. It's just you. Mm-hmm. Okay? So we all figured we were there, for 6 months, and then they'd start rotating other people in and out. Well, I was there my 6 months, and by then we had a baby daughter. So again, I left a bride and a baby daughter at home, and that was tough. Now, the only good news is that it was close enough in Germany that on Friday nights when we were completely done and closed down with everything, I could hop in the car and I could get home late, and I could spend Saturday or Sunday morning and then in the car and back again on the weekends when we didn't work.
That's good, yeah.
Okay, so that was wonderful because it wasn't like another 6 months and you're gone permanent.
Right.
So my 6 months were up. I went back to Hahn, checked into base personnel. It was a great job. Again, it was like prime beef.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not an office job filling out papers and forms and that kind of crap. I mean, it was a job, a real job. Design it and build it in the field. Mm-hmm. And when you need something, the logistics were provided. By golly, we need these materials, and materials were there.
Right.
It was a wonderful job. So I spent 6 months. I went back to Hahn Air Base and checked in. Just as soon as I checked in, the colonel and personnel said to me something to the effect, "Well, you must have impressed somebody, Captain." And I said, "Why's that, Colonel?" And he said, "Here's your orders back." He said, "Enjoy your weekend." Okay, so I went back. I went back to Ramstein on that next Monday. Same job, same squadron, same everything. So in essence, I got the weekend off to end one TDY and start another TDY.
I see.
So the good news was it was a great job. I loved working for that general. He was like a father and a mentor to me. Okay, but he called me in shortly after that. He knew that I had a young wife and a baby at home, and he changed it from temporary duty to permanent change of station.
I see.
So Jacqueline and Terry Lee relocated then, and they were at Ramstein. So for the rest of my 4 years there, it was an accompanied tour. And it was a fabulous job. I mean, again, between what I did at Prime Beef and what I did in Red Horse, out of my 7 years, I spent 3 or 4 months doing paperwork at Warner Robins, Georgia, and I spent less than a year in an office job, if you will, at the base civil engineer at Hahn, and all the rest of my tour was designing building things in the field.
And doing what you wanted to do.
Absolutely. It was unbelievable experience. I'd be willing to put that experience up against any 21-year-old architecture school graduate in terms of being able to do things, to learn things, to be taught, as opposed to working in an office in those days on a drawing board.
What kind of challenges did being away from home create for you and for your wife?
Well, I think with a baby at the time, it's tough on everybody. It's our first child, I mean, to take care of it all alone for even a week at a time, hey, that's a lot. Okay, but the excitement of seeing them both on weekends is always very exciting.
Well, take it back to Vietnam then, to when you were in Vietnam. What challenges were there then for you and your wife? I mean, she had family around,
yes,
and so that was fortunate. But talk about the being away for that length of time, and then the transition of coming back home and trying to reestablish yourself.
Well, I think being gone's tough. It's tough on anybody. I mean, it certainly wasn't me. I mean, it'd be an understatement to say I missed my wife. Yeah, immensely.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, the days can be long and the nights can be long and that sort of thing. But the other side of that coin was that the assignments I had and the jobs I had, I didn't have a whole lot of time to sit around and agonize, or a whole lot of time to sit around and think about it. I mean, I was pretty busy a whole bunch of the time, and that certainly helped.
Yes.
There's no question. But
what about for her?
Time. It's a long time. Well, my comfort level, she was with her mom and dad.
Yes.
My mom and dad were there. My older sister lived in Albuquerque. Her mom and dad lived there. She lived with them the year she taught junior high school while I was gone. So I had a real high comfort level.
That's good.
That she was in good hands. Now, if she'd have been living alone somewhere, I would not have had that comfort level, and that would have indeed been a burden. That would have been something to seriously worry about.
Right. So fast forward back to Germany. You finish your time at Wiesbaden after the second TDY that became a PCS.
At Ramstein, yes.
Ramstein, excuse me. What did you do after that?
I separated. I left the Air Force. While I was at Ramstein, I had the opportunity to come back to the States to go to Squadron Officer School, in-person assignment, which was really prestigious, and I was excited as could be as a young officer to get to do that. It was 90 days in the States to go to that school. I did that. Oh, darn, excuse me. And while I was at Hahn, the first year I was there, they had a special program. The University of Arkansas brought professors over for 1 year at a time, and they had a graduate program for a master's degree in management.
Wow.
And a lot of the Air Force officers, it was geared. We went to class at night times and on weekends. Okay. So I was able to finish that program while I was there. So I had a master's degree. I'd had all that field experience. And I've been to Squadron Officer School now, so I was feeling, excuse me, sorry about that. I was feeling pretty strong about my career at that point.
Yeah.
But my 6-year commitment was up between Vietnam and Germany. I was coming up on 7 years, and I had to make the decision whether to stay in or get out. And I agonized about that for a very, very long time because my dream was still to be a general officer. I was
Right.
still convinced I was going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, what are the odds? Probably slim but none because,
Mm-hmm.
a very small percentage make it, but I still believed I could.
Mm-hmm.
That was my goal. But ultimately, I made the decision to get out, and I came back. I was discharged at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey, and started my civilian career.
So where did you go after your discharge?
My first assignment was Minneapolis, Minnesota. I took a job with a large company that was designing and building big enclosed shopping centers. The big era in that day.
Yeah.
Build a big shopping mall with 100 retail stores in it.
Right.
Well, that's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that was Air Force related because I never had a job. Right out of college, I went in the Air Force. And a captain friend of mine had gotten out a year before I did, went to work for this company.
I see.
So when I was going to get out, I contacted him and said, I don't even have a resume. What do I do? And I turned in a resume to that company, and they made a phone call, and I got hired. So we went to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I worked as an assistant project manager there in the freezing cold winters and godforsaken place. Okay, the spring and the summer.
Warner Robins level, godforsaken?
Except for cold. The other direction. Spring and summer was wonderful, so that was horrible in terms of weather.
Right.
But we weren't there very long, maybe a little over a year, and I got transferred then to Chicago, Illinois, to build a shopping center there.
See.
Okay, so
Same company?
Pardon me?
Same company?
Yes, same company.
And what year was this that you left the Air Force?
Oh, I left the Air Force in 1970, 75, 74, 75.
Okay.
Probably 75. So
All right.
we're talking about the mid-70s. Chicago, Illinois, to work on a shopping center project there. And again, spring, summer was beautiful, and then came winter.
Mm-hmm.
Holy cats, it's as cold as Minneapolis.
Mm.
Okay, so we spent 2 years there. And after 2 years there, that was 3 years of the bitter winter. And I went to my boss and said, listen, you guys are building shopping centers all over the United States. You must have something.
Right.
You must have something west toward Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'll take anything as close as you can get me to Albuquerque, New Mexico. So he laughed, and there was an opportunity that came up. So later that year, we were transferred, and that's how we ultimately ended up in Arlington, Texas.
I see.
This is as close as they could get me to Albuquerque, New Mexico.
I see.
And the weather here was totally acceptable, and it was a beautiful place.
Right.
And we ended up in Arlington because I worked on one shopping center in Dallas and on another one in Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
And way back then, it was actually a commute. It wasn't like today where it's one giant metroplex.
Right.
You drive on a highway,
Yeah.
freeway to Dallas, on another one to Fort Worth and back. So we picked Arlington because it was halfway between the two for my work. And
I see.
that's how we ended up in Arlington, Texas.
That's interesting. Going back to when you left the military, 1975, you said.
Somewhere.
So the
yes.
fall of Saigon happens during that time. Were you paying attention at all to what was going on in Vietnam with the Vietnam War? And did you have any feelings about all of that?
No, I paid absolutely no attention.
That's
I'm almost
interesting.
embarrassed to say that when I left, I put all my military stuff, all my
Yes.
ribbons, all my medals, all my awards, I put them in a drawer, closed them up, went to civilian life. Again, young father of two, okay, go to make a living, time to go to work, same energy level.
No ruminating on your past experience in the military or as a Vietnam veteran at all, just
I just focused on civilian life. I really did. I didn't pay any attention to what was going on in Vietnam then. Again, I was really busy, worked a lot of hours, worked hard, and
now you have a daughter,
yes,
and then
Son.
A son.
Our
Okay.
daughter was born in Germany,
Mhm,
and our son was born in Chicago, Illinois.
I
So
see.
they're about 4 years apart.
I see. Okay.
So we had two small children at the
Mhm.
time when we came
Yeah.
here to Texas.
Right.
Uh,
And
we
had you
have been here
been
ever
to
since.
Dallas Fort Worth prior to?
Never.
So sight unseen.
You have to understand, I'd only been to Albuquerque, New Mexico, Warner Robins, Georgia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Germany.
Right.
That's the 5 places I'd been at that point in
That's
my
right.
life. Okay, so no, Texas was not on the list.
Right.
I had not.
So you were satisfied though when you came to Texas?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I had.
Well, you've been here.
Listen, I have to give the credit again. I credit almost everything back to the military. I know a lot of guys.
Yes.
A lot of guys didn't have that kind of experience in the military. They served their time, okay, but they didn't really think they got a lot out of it, or they didn't take their experience or their education in a particular field and then go use it in civilian life. I'm the exact opposite. Everything I learned in the military, I took and used for the rest of my entire civilian career. Everything, without exception.
Right.
I mean, all the design, all the construction management, all of those things I learned in the field as a second lieutenant and a first lieutenant and a captain,
Yeah.
okay, all of that. All the leadership, management, communication skills, everything from all the military training and all the military classes. I used all that to this day.
Why did you
convinced.
decide to leave though? Why did you decide to get out?
As I said, it was the hardest decision
Right.
at that point in my life I had to make.
Mm-hmm.
Probably on a selfish motive,
Mm-hmm.
okay? I'm real proud and I'm happy to brag about Red Horse.
Yes.
Again, being the best of the best.
Yes.
Prime beef, the same thing. And that's wonderful. But one of my concerns and one of my fears was even when I stayed on active duty for an extended period of time, because of that experience, would I be in prime beef again? Would I be mobilized?
Yes.
Okay. Would I not be as fortunate to be in Germany and close? Would I be God knows where in the world? And I was concerned about that.
Yes.
And truthfully, I thought, you know what, that'll be more unfair to Jacqueline than it is to me.
I see. Mm-hmm.
I could go do that because that's my job, but it's easier for me to survive that separation than it is for her. I mean,
Right.
she'd be at home then with 2 small children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's unfair. She would have supported whatever I did. Absolutely, she would have, and I knew that. But for that reason, I decided that I would try my hand at civilian life, and no regrets.
Were you awarded any medals or citations that you are particularly proud of?
Yes, I am. I have a Bronze Star from Vietnam, and I earned that as a first lieutenant. So, yeah, I'm real proud about that. And in Germany, as a young captain, I have 2 meritorious service medals. So,
Very
for
good.
my 7 years, I felt good about all 3.
I'm sure you did. What was your favorite part of serving?
The job in the field of start, finish, done,
Right.
DUN done, 100%. Okay. Pack up, clean up. There's absolutely nothing left to be done. Now, done, DUN done, let's go home.
Right.
Yeah, that's very self-satisfying to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And something, again, that I carried forward for my whole civilian career. It's something that I think is a motivation.
Mm-hmm. What was the lowest point?
The lowest point in my military career? You mean other than Warner Robins, Georgia?
I probably could have skipped that question, but yeah, let's.
I was disappointed at Warner Robins, okay, but it was not like it was so terrible it was the end of the world. It just
Right.
It wasn't the kind of job that I wanted. It wasn't the excitement that I had
Sure.
expected. Maybe my expectations were unrealistic or too high. So that was disappointing to me. And I could have lived through that disappointment.
Sure.
Don't let me
Yeah.
don't misunderstand. It wasn't like the end of the world. Okay, that was the most disappointing, but everything else, wow. I mean, they were good assignments and good projects.
Are there any people that you remember, and what made you laugh?
What made me laugh? Other than my wife?
Did she make you laugh?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Doesn't every good wife?
Yes.
Don't they chew you out when you need chewing out? Don't they make,
But I don't laugh at
don't
that.
they laugh when you're funny? Don't they laugh?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You said, do I still keep in touch?
Well, I said
any of those folks?
that question is coming up.
Oh.
Who do you remember, and did anyone in particular make you laugh?
Well, I think two separate questions. If you said, who do I remember, the person out of my military career that I remember most is Brigadier General Thompson, who was the flag officer in Germany
Yes.
that I worked for. Ironically, he was an architect. Obviously a brigadier general, he was very successful, and he was a mentor to me, absolutely. He was a father figure when I needed it.
Yes.
Would sit me down and talk with me and give me guidance. Okay, he was probably the best boss I ever had. He was terrific, and he had a huge influence, on my motivation and my determination. And you know, when you don't succeed, you don't give up. You step back and go at it again. I mean, he was an incredible teacher. He was a wonderful leader. So I remember him more than anybody else in the military. And again, I contribute a lot of my civilian success to his tutorage, to being that instructor, being that teacher for me.
So who did you stay in contact with, or did you stay in contact with anyone after you got
I do.
out?
Ironically, they're not actually from active duty friends. They're from ROTC friends at the University of New Mexico. I still have one in Albuquerque that we've been in touch all these years, and when we go through Albuquerque traveling to our summer home in Colorado, we stop and have lunch and chat and all that sort of thing. Still stay in touch with him. The best man in our wedding was an ROTC cadet. Richard did not graduate his senior year. I did and went to active duty, but he left and went into the civilian sector. But I still stay in touch with him. He lives in South Texas. So it's from the college days, really, not from the active duty days.
Interesting. What reminds you of your service? Any music or sounds or smells or food, anything like that that reminds you of your
I think,
service?
honestly, I think probably the most emotional is when they play the Air Force song. Probably when I was on active duty, if you had asked me that question, it wouldn't have, just another song.
Right.
Okay, what the heck.
Right.
But yeah, as I got older, for whatever reason, Veterans Day is more important to me now than it was for many years. The songs from each of the branches, you watch a football game on TV and you watch all the cadet corps and you watch them march in and march out, and you watch even whichever team wins or loses when they go to the other side and play the song, et cetera, et cetera. That to me is real emotional.
Yes.
I enjoy that a lot. And with total respect for what they do.
Are you involved in any veterans organizations currently?
No, I'm not. Never have pursued that, to be very honest. I know from talking with John Mann, a good friend that you spoke with, there are organizations around. I just have never really pursued those for whatever reason. The one thing I have done, my wife and I, that I really am proud of, we sponsor an ROTC scholarship at the University of New Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So we go back and do that presentation. We did that last year. It originally started off a scholarship that my older brother and I put together, It was his idea, and he contacted me, and I thought it was a great idea. We put it together, and up until his passing, we did it together. And it was through the Presidential Scholarship Program, which is young students that obviously have high academic achievements, and they're given scholarships. And my brother was more on the academic side. He's the egghead in the family. Okay, so he was real hot on that, and I was real hot on the cadet side, the ROTC side.
Right.
So the first few years, we were really lucky. We got a presidential scholar who was an Air Force ROTC cadet. So it was a home run for both of us.
Right.
Well, when that young man graduated, then we got another, and ironically, she was an ROTC cadet. Well, my brother passed, so and I continued the scholarship program. Okay, and I was still a lot more interested in the ROTC cadet portion than the academic portion. I mean, I respect totally the academics and have understand totally great respect for that end of it, having had children and grandchildren that are in that category. But to me, and what happened, and the reason, as I told you earlier, that I actually graduated college and was able to do what I did, was my motivation being a cadet.
Right.
Okay? So a year ago, 2 years ago, I transferred it from the Presidential Scholarship Program to a new program they have, because the ROTC program now at UNM is independent. It has a dean of a college, just like the School of Architecture or Engineering or Fine Arts, that sort of thing. And it's got Army, Navy, Air Force, ROTC underneath it, a complete program.
Wow.
And I moved my scholarship, so we now sponsor a cadet every year. And the criteria for that is that they are not a presidential scholar. In other words, they're not getting other scholarships. This is not one of a multitude. This is a cadet that's a hard worker that the colonel there selects, obviously. Somebody, for lack of a better term, that's middle of the road, hard worker, determined. And they pick that cadet every year. And last year we went to the spring dining out, the big formal ceremony with all the cadets, et cetera, and did the presentation of that scholarship to a young lady cadet. There'll be a senior this year, will graduate with her degree in nursing and be a second lieutenant at the end of this semester. So that to me is very satisfying.
Yes.
Very, very enjoyable.
Any of your children follow you in the military?
They did not. Neither.
That's interesting. What did you encourage them in any way to do that or not to do it?
I did not.
You just
I didn't go either way. I never pushed it. I guess in fairness, I never really even gave it any thought. You know, I mean, they were each smart young folks in college, and we're all, you know, picking their direction in life and what they were going to do, and I just supported that and thought that was wonderful. So,
if you could serve all over again, would you do it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I could have the jobs I had, if I could work for people like General Thompson, if I could do everything that I did again, yeah, you bet, without any hesitation, none. Again, I can't think of anything I did my entire civilian career that I didn't learn or start with in the military. Everything.
So you're retired now, is that correct?
I am, yes, for a very long time.
Tell me about retirement. What does that look like for you and for your wife?
Oh, I think it's fair to say we've enjoyed it. The year I turned 60 years old, I had my own companies at that time, had for 25 years or more, and they were retail oriented. Surprise, surprise, again. I got started in the shopping center industry, designing and building shopping malls from my connection in the Air Force.
Right.
And after being here in Dallas, Fort Worth, to design and build 2 of those shopping centers, another military connection because I was contacted by a company called Zale Corporation. They're no longer around, but in those days they were the largest retail jeweler in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was contacted by them and interviewed for a job unexpectedly. And guess where that came from?
The military.
The gentleman that interviewed me was a senior vice president. He was a retired 3-star Air Force general.
Oh, wow.
Who knew General Robert Thompson.
Is that right?
Yes. So
wow.
Guess where that job came from?
Mm-hmm. Right.
From the military.
Right.
Okay, and I stayed in that job all the way up until when I left and started my own company. So the military influence for me is strong.
So when did you start your own company, and how long did you do that?
I kept it for a little more than 25 years.
Oh, wow.
I spent, round numbers, it was probably in the early 80s, 81, 82. The year I turned 60 years old, retail was really doing well. And I'd been around that industry long enough to know that it's hot and cold like a yo-yo. And when it's cold, you got nothing, because all the national retailers are on the same track.
Right.
Okay, so when it's bad, nobody's working, and when it's good, they're all booming. So the industry was booming at that point in time, and I thought about it long and hard, and I sold the architectural and engineering design company, and I sold the general construction company, and formally retired. I was 60 years old. And then for the next 5 years, I taught construction management classes all across the United States.
Oh, wow.
It was an education program for construction management that I wrote for an organization called Retail Contractors Association. They were a national association for all the general contractors that specialized in retail. It was a great job. I mean, I had written the program and put it together, and I would customize it for a company, and I would go in for 5 days, and all their field superintendents and all their project managers, and teach a 5-day seminar program. Loved it. I mean, it was fabulous. I got paid to do something that wasn't really a job.
Right.
It wasn't hard. Okay, so I did that for a period of time, which was, really good. I enjoyed it.
That's great. And what advice do you have for young people who are considering a military career or who are actually going into a military career? What would you advise them?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, and Joe, the reason is that if I just base it on my personal experience, I would unequivocally say, go into the military, be an officer, and have all of these opportunities. But that might be a bit unfair, because I know there's a ton of opportunities for enlisted people as well. And I've heard of and know people that went in out of high school as an enlisted person, had a great 20-year career, learned a set of skills that at 37 or 38 years old, you retire at 20 years, and you take those skills and go somewhere else for another 20 years. And you're barely 60 years old, and you've got 2 20-year careers in retirement. So there's an awful lot to be said for that direction. But I don't know about that, obviously. I only know mine. So if I based it just on mine, I would say, yeah, absolutely. If you could do what I did, wow, jump all over it and do it. But I'm also smart enough to know that some career fields are not going to do what mine did for me.
That's true.
You may have a career field that you just ultimately don't like, and you leave the military and you go do something totally unrelated, at which point in time I don't think you can give your military experience and career credit for whatever you're doing and whatever success you have. Again, in my case, I give all my success directly related to the military training. It was absolutely a two-way street. There's no question. They gave me equal to or more than what I gave them.
Well, is there anything that you would like to add to this interview that we haven't touched on?
No, I really can't think of anything, to be very honest. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely. Veterans Day is a really special day now. I don't know why, as I get older, somehow every year those kind of holidays get to be a little more emotional. They were in past years. I didn't even, realize it existed. Just, another day, another holiday, keep on moving. It is meaningful these days. There's no doubt. It's an enjoyable day, and again, I think it's only fair to say that, you know, even though I didn't encounter it firsthand a lot, the whole Jane Fonda protest, the Vietnam soldiers coming home and being spit at, being called baby killers, all that sort of thing, that was horrible. It's absolutely horrible. I mean, the young soldiers that went to serve only did what they were asked to do or told to do.
Right.
I mean, to me, all of that protest should have been at Washington, D.C. You know, if you really feel that strong, and I respect totally that you have the right to feel that way, then go do it for the senators and the congressmen or the president or whoever. You know, don't do it to the soldiers. So the difference today is 100%. Society today, open arms for all the veterans. Open arms across the board. It's very refreshing to see on the news the young soldiers coming home and the welcome home they're getting, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, as corny as it may sound, the little things. You know what, a 10% discount at Home Depot, 10% discount at Lowe's and at Ace Hardware. You know, little things. And you put in that military discount, and at Lowe's and Home Depot both, your receipt says, thank you for your service.
Right.
Or the speaker on the computer says, thank you for your service. You know, at Ace Hardware, every time you use your military card, every cashier without exception says, thank you for your service. Okay? It's just very refreshing.
Yes.
You know, it's like, wow, no kidding. So it's those little things. It's nice to see society now embrace the military.
Well, thank you for the time that you spent interviewing with me. It's been very enlightening, and I appreciate it. And thank you for your service.
Thank you. I appreciate that.